Hey, and welcome back to the Life Work Balance YouTube channel. I'm Abby, and today I would like to share with you 7 tips on how you can make a great first impression during any interview. Make sure you stick around to the end of this video because I've got a bonus tip for you on how you can make the best impression during an interview. But before we jump into that, if you are looking forward to seeing how you can make a good first impression during any interview, please go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the bell so that you can receive life work balance advice delivered directly to you every Sunday. And if you haven't already joined me on Twitch, I live stream office hours every Monday where I provide you with free career coaching, free job search advice, resume, cover letter, or interview advice, LinkedIn advice, the gamut. So if you are interested in receiving that free advice or free career coaching, please go ahead and join me on Twitch on Monday. You can follow me on Twitch using the link in the description box below, and I hope to see you there. So interviews are all about first impressions. If you make a bad first impression, you are likely not going to be considered for the next round of interviews, and you certainly won't be considered for the job. So it's up to you to make sure that you have set yourself up so that you can make the best impression to the interviewers, to the interview panel, and throughout the interview process so that you can move on to the next step of the interview process and hopefully get hired into this job. So there are 7 things that you can do to ensure that you make a good first impression. First and foremost is timeliness. Timeliness is something that is important in every job, so you want to make sure that you can demonstrate this timeliness during your interview process. So make sure you show up early. If this is an in-person interview, show up at least 15 minutes early to the interview location. Get checked in, do whatever you need to do so that you can be ready to go when it is time to start your interview. Make sure that you show up at least 15 minutes early, if not more. You want to make sure that if this is an in-person interview, that you give yourself time to account for any traffic delays, any accidents that might happen. If you are using public transportation, riding your bike, walking, or somehow getting to the interview location, you want to make sure that there will be nothing in your way when it comes to being on time for this interview. You will make a good first impression by showing up early because that will demonstrate your timeliness, which, like I said before, is something that is essential and critical to every job out there. Employers do not want to hire someone who cannot get to work on time. Employers are concerned that if they do hire someone who can't get to work on time, that it will begin to affect their client relationships and their overall success in the organization. So timeliness is essential. So that is why it's my number 1 tip for making a good impression during the interview process. Next, my second tip is you want to make sure that you are dressed to impress. When it comes to dressing up for an interview, you do not have to pull out a ball gown or a tuxedo. However, you do want to make sure that you're dressed the part or likely one step above what the typical dress code is for that position. So for example, if you're working in the service industry and the typical attire is jeans and a t-shirt, you probably want to wear maybe a nice pair of jeans and a nice polo shirt or a button-up shirt. Something that dresses it up just a little bit, but isn't too over the top. If you're going to be working in an office environment where everyone is dressed business casual, you will likely want to just dress it up one level above that. So maybe you wear a sport coat or a blazer, or maybe you put on heels rather than flats. But no matter what, you'll need to do some research to determine what the general uniform or dress code is for that organization in that position, and do your best to try to step it up at least one notch above what the typical dress code is. If you're too fancy for the organization or your interview, the interviewers might not think that you're a good fit for the organization. They might not think that you can connect with the customers that you might be working with or the clients that you're working with. And if you dress too casual, the opposite will happen. The interviewers will be worried that you will not be as professional as they need you to be successful in the role. I have an example of this. When I was on an interview panel, we were interviewing someone for an office-based job. Granted, it is currently a remote job, but the person who was interviewing for this position potentially would need to go into the office to meet with clients or customers. They showed up to their interview wearing a tank top. Their hair was not done, and it looked like they may have just recently rolled out of bed. That didn't make a great first impression. And while we as the interviewers tried to look past that, that was something that did impact our overall decision about if we were going to move forward with this person or not. And ultimately, based on that first impression, we decided not to move forward with that candidate. So tip number 2 to make a great impression during your interview process is to dress the part and dress to impress. My third tip for how to impress during an interview is to make eye contact. And this is applicable to whether you are in an in-person interview or a video interview. Video interviews are a little bit more difficult to make eye contact because you actually have to look at your camera rather than the people on your screen. However, holding eye contact indicates that you are confident and that you are sure of your answers and of your experience. That confidence doesn't come off as too egotistical and does indicate that you will be good at the job and that you are confident in your responses to interview questions. However, there is a limit when it comes to eye contact. You don't want to be staring people down and never blinking. You want to make sure that it's comfortable and that you're able to connect with each person that you're speaking with. So your eye contact should not be too intense and over the top, and it also shouldn't be completely lacking. You want to make sure that you're making eye contact while you're having these conversations, answering their questions, and making it feel like it's a little bit more comfortable for everyone who's involved. If you are over the top with your eye contact, you never break it, you never blink, the interviewers might feel a little bit concerned about what's going on. And the same thing happens for if you're never going to make eye contact with them to begin with. If you're constantly looking down at your paper, or if you're looking over their shoulder or at the wall behind them, or maybe even at something that might be on their face, they're going to be a little bit more self-conscious about you not making eye contact with them, and overall the experience for everyone will not be as comfortable. So you want to make sure that in order to make a good first impression, that you balance out that eye contact. Not too much, not too little. My fourth tip for making a good impression during an interview is to give thoughtful but succinct responses to each of the interview questions that are asked of you. You don't want to appear too breathy or too rushed when you're responding to the interview questions. This means that you might take a moment to take a deep breath before you respond to the question that's been asked of you. It also means that you have thought about your responses to these interview questions. Now, you can't prepare for every single interview question, but you can do your best to prepare for most interview questions. You can do this in a variety of ways. The first thing I recommend is watch some of my interview tips videos. I have an entire playlist that includes all of the videos I've created with many different interview tips. One of the primary tips that I have included in these videos is coming up with your CAR or STAR response to behavior-based interview questions. Behavior-based interview questions are very common during the interview process, and if you can come up with 3 to 5 different scenarios that you can use with your CAR or STAR response, you can answer almost any interview question with pre-prepared answers where you've already got all of the information you need to share with the interviewers to give them a thoughtful, succinct response. When you give these thoughtful, succinct responses, it also indicates that you have prepared for this interview and you're not just winging it. Showing that you've prepared and put a little bit of thought into your responses indicates to the interviewers that you care about this interview and that you're committed to doing a good job and making a good first impression. One of the other things you can do during the interview, whether it's in person or during a video interview, is take notes. So I recommend bringing a padfolio with you or a notebook to every interview that you are in. That way you can open up your notebook and jot down some notes about the questions that are being asked of you and maybe even ways that you would like to respond. Now, this doesn't mean that you spend 5 minutes taking notes after every interview question, but you can take some notes while the interviewers are speaking. That will ensure that you fully answer the questions that have been asked of you and that you don't miss any important parts. In that notebook, you can also have written down CAR or STAR as a reminder so that you don't begin to fumble over your words or forget the formula to answer those behavior-based interview questions. You could even have your notes about what types of scenarios you would like to share for some of those interview question responses. And you can also write down your 3, at minimum 3, questions that you would like to ask the interviewers at the end of your interview. Which leads me into my 5th tip. Have questions prepared for the interviewers. No matter what, you should have 3 questions prepared for the interviewers once you are done with the interview questions that they are asking you so that you can ask them some questions. Every single interview that I've been a part of, the interviewers have asked the candidate if they have any questions for them. The biggest thing that you should not do is say no, that you do not have any questions, or that all of your questions were asked during the interview process. 100% have at least 3 questions prepared for the interviewers. One of those questions may be answered, but you will want to do some additional research and brainstorming about the different types of questions that you could potentially ask these interviewers. If you haven't already, please go ahead and check out my video on the 3 types of questions that you should ask at the end of every interview. These are questions that you can ask at the end of your first interview, your second interview, your final interview, and the end of a phone interview. You don't want to necessarily duplicate these questions, but I do give you examples of questions that you could ask at the end of the interview process. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and check out that video next. My sixth tip relates specifically to in-person interviews. If you have an in-person interview, there are a couple of things that you can do to really impress the interviewers. The first is to shake their hands. Now, I know in this era of the pandemic, it may be discouraged to shake people's hands. So I recommend at least indicating that you would like to shake their hand or indicating that you are saying hello to an individual directly. Whether this is through a fist bump, a wave, actually shaking their hands, some sort of gesture that indicates that you are connecting with the individual person directly. Shaking someone's hand and having a firm, professional handshake can go a long ways when it comes to showing your confidence and your overall professionalism. If you are not able to shake hands, something like a fist bump or a wave will suffice. However, you will want to make that individual personal connection with each of the interviewers in the room when you join. The second thing that you can do is bring copies of your resume. Chances are, if you're in a panel interview, not all of the interviewers will have looked at your resume or your application package. They may have just been involved in the actual interview and will be given interview questions to ask you so that they can give their opinion on you as a potential candidate. However, chances are they have not deeply looked at your resume or your application package. So I recommend that if you have an in-person interview, bring several copies of your resume and share it with the interviewers. This can give them a chance to look it over and maybe ask you specific questions about your education, your experience, your training, or anything else you bring to the table for your interview. It also shows that you're prepared, and all of that leads to making a great first impression during the interview process. My seventh tip for you is to follow up every interview with a thank you email or a thank you note that you might either send in the mail or drop off in person. Now, I have a video specifically on how to write a thank you after an interview. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and check that out next. Most candidates forget this really critical step in the interview process. You want to take every opportunity to make a great first impression to the interviewers. And most people remember the first thing about you and the last thing about you. And if their last interaction with you is receiving a thank you note, thanking them for the opportunity to interview, maybe asking them a follow-up question, or clarifying something that you feel like you've forgotten or could have clarified further in your interview, they're going to have a positive impression of you. So leaving that positive impression is important, and it's in your hands. So even if you feel like you may have stumbled during the interview process, taking the time to follow up with a thank you to the interviewers afterwards will go far. And like I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, my bonus tip for you is to remember people's names. This way, if you see them in an interview in the future, you will remember their name and be able to actually say their name to them directly. Like, Abby, it's great to see you again. If you can greet people directly and use their names, they will be shocked that you can remember their names and that you even put in the effort to remember their names. And that will make them feel good. And ultimately, your success in an interview is all about how you make the interviewers feel. So if you can start off your next interview with them, making them feel good and going, wow, I can't believe that they remembered my name. Even if your interview doesn't go well, that first impression or that first greeting can go far for you. Now, if this is a video interview and it's not in person, one of the things you might be able to do is take a screenshot of the Brady Bunch that's in front of you. You will not only have people's pictures as well as their names, but then you'll be able to actually put faces to names during your next interview. So my bonus tip to you is to remember people's names. Write them down, take a screenshot, do whatever you need to do so that you can remember who's who for your next round of interviews. So hopefully you found this video helpful. Hopefully you feel confident in being able to make a good first impression for your next interview. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts, or ideas, please put them in the comments box below, and I will read through everything that comes through and get back to you individually. I do read through every comment that comes through, and I do respond to them individually. So again, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, or ideas, please throw them in the comments box below, and I will read them and get back to you as quickly as I am able. If you are interested in joining in on my free office hours on Twitch, please follow my Twitch channel. I've linked to it in the description box below. I will answer all of your career-related questions, your job search questions, any questions you might have about your resume, your cover letter, or interviews, even your LinkedIn profile. Anything that is career or job search related, join me in office hours on Mondays on Twitch. I will get your questions answered. And finally, if you liked this video, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the bell so that you can receive life-work balance advice delivered directly to you every Sunday. Thanks, and I'll see you next week.